Welcome back to MMA Al Dente. I am the guy who picked Jersey Joe Walcott to defeat Rocky Marciano. I had that one wrong. And I'm here to talk about UFC Fight Night Edwards versus Brady, UFC Fight Night London, or whatever. All right. Okay, opening up the card, we have Guram Kutateladze versus Kaue Fernandez. My prediction for this fight is Guram Kutateladze wins, and I've got him winning by decision. Having said that, right now I'm just resisting the urge to bet on Kaue Fernandez. I think what I'll do is look to put a few sprinkles on him winning by knockout, because I consider that his primary path to victory, and he's a nice underdog, plus 350 or close enough. But I do think Guram wins by decision. It's just that there's some doubt creeping in with Guram. You know, him getting knocked down and knocked out in his last two fights. And before that was a loss to Damir Ismagulov, which should be a stain on his record, but I don't really consider that a big stain at all. And of course, he could have won that fight anyway. But yeah, he's a guy who fights too infrequently for me to really track his progress. I thought he could have been a title contender just a few years ago, but now here we are 4 or 5 years later, and he's only got 4 fights or whatever. And of course, getting knocked out by Elvis Brenner was not a great look. Elvis really upset him there and got it done in round 3. But it wasn't totally due to cardio. He got knocked out. He hit the mat. And against Jordan Vucenic, he hit the mat as well. He got knocked down, but he rallied back to fight and outlast Jordan and out wrestle him. And that was a great look, especially going into this fight, because Kaue Fernandez is dangerous on the feet. But Guram Kutateladze, I think, would make it a lot easier for himself if he was to get on top of Kaue Fernandez. Kaue's been beaten twice, both by decision. And in general, wrestling and cardio are responsible for those losses. Mark Giacchese got on top of him, generally speaking, in his UFC debut. And in his loss before that, just a few years ago, this guy Sardinia outlasted him. He was able to get on top of him. He was really working him on the ground, which might have cost him his energy. Wasn't able to close the show, even though he came close. And then he hit a wall and had nothing left after round 1, pretty much. And was exhausted in round 3 and ended up losing the fight. But yeah, he's still never been finished, which is a great look. He's 30 years old and healthy, and he's dangerous himself. He may not be the best athlete on the feet. Like, he's not the quickest guy, but his strikes themselves are still very sharp. This guy's technical. He's got great kicks, a nice, beautiful head kick in short. And other than that one loss where he did fatigue, he's looked good when he's needed to down the stretch as well. Uh, but against Guram Kutateladze, I do trust Guram in general to be able to keep himself safe. Of course, getting knocked down and surviving against Jordan in his last fight was a great look. But in general here, I do think Guram is the faster guy on the feet. I think he moves better. And I think he's much more physical and beastly. And I think would secure top position. On the ground, neither is the biggest submission threat. I guess I'd give the nod to Kaue because he's got 2 submissions in his 9 victories as opposed to 1 and 13 for Guram. But I don't think anybody's going to be sweeping anybody with a Kimura and putting them away or anything like that. That never fucking happens. But if you don't know, because I don't know when you're watching this, I'm talking about Brennison Hibiero versus DR Nurgajai. But I do think regardless of who's got the better jiu-jitsu or submission skills, Guram wins on the mat. I think he gets top position. I think he's the much more physical fighter, stronger guy, and would pop his head out of submissions and win with control time. And that's really how I see the fight going. I think Guram Kutateladze would outlast Kaue and would out-grapple him. And hopefully he knows he's got to do that, he and his coaches, because that's the easiest path to victory against Kaue Fernandez. But Even if he doesn't, he might need to get clipped like he did against Jordan Vucenic to change gears. But yeah, Guram Kutateladze, I don't have as much faith in him as I once did, but I have enough faith in him here to pick him to win. But still, maybe not enough faith to bet on him at all. So there's that. Next up, we have Caolan versus Nathan Fletcher. My prediction for this fight is Fletcher wins, and I'm going to go with him winning by decision. I think Fletcher can bring a wrestling threat that Caolan has not tasted in the UFC so far. I think, he's still only 1-2, so it's not like he's faring so well in these striking matchups either. But I think this is going to be a different kind of test. And of course, I should mention the basis for the prediction, at least a large part of it, is that they have fought as amateurs, and Nathan Fletcher won that fight. And largely it was due to top control. It was a 9-minute amateur fight with 3-minute rounds, and it was 6 or 7 years ago. So you can fucking dismiss it. You're probably better off dismissing it. But still, Fletcher's scrambling and wrestling was what won him the fight. It was back and forth. It was fun. Each guy threatening with submissions and advancing the mount and the rest of it. But yeah, and over the course of 9 minutes, Fletcher had his hips higher on the ground and won with positioning. But yeah, here, Caolan, he's only got 2 defeats as a pro, and they are both on the feet to Jake Hadley, who moved up in weight on very short notice, but did have a speed advantage, and also against Taylor Lapulus, who for some reason I believe was cut from the UFC for the second time, despite having a 3-1 record. I think both times, in both stints. I could be wrong, but either way, what the fuck? I don't know. But anyway, Caolan, he's very tough. Never been finished as a pro, obviously, or as an amateur. Whereas Nathan Fletcher has been finished a few times. Nathan Fletcher's cardio has to be called into question because he suffered a loss as a pro and as an amateur that were due to a cardio collapse. His wrestling fell apart against Dom Wooding as a pro, and he ended up getting knocked out in round 3. And as an amateur, he got submitted in round 5, which is the 13th, 14th, or 15th minute of the fight. They're 3-minute rounds. And it was a fight where he was cruising to a victory and then started to get tired and concede positions at the end of round 4 or whatever. And in round 5, after a little bit of a struggle, he ended up getting strangled and a weird scramble and whatever. But yeah, the guy got on top of him and submitted him. And I think his cardio has to at least be a concern. Of course, he also lost as an exhibitionist against, not that he's a nudist, against Khan Ofley on The Ultimate Fighter. Khan Ofley beat him, but Khan was sharper and quicker on the feet and was able to strike his way in and rip Nathan Fletcher to the mat. And I think his speed gave him a lot of trouble there. But I think Nathan Fletcher will have a speed advantage here on the feet. I think he's not as good of a striker and he can run into trouble against Caolan, but I think his speed and his movement will help him manage the striking and also set up takedowns perhaps a little better as I lose my fucking voice. But I think on the ground, he's got to watch out from Caolan. Caolan, he's a beast on the ground. All those TKOs he has on his record, the majority of them come on the ground. And they come in round 2 as well. This guy's heavy on top. I think he's more physical than Nathan Fletcher and hits harder. And I think if he gets on top of Nathan Fletcher, especially if Fletcher finds himself tired, he could be in big trouble. Caolan advances on guys. The majority of his finishes, and certainly the last 4, have been in round 2, and only one of those was on the feet. All other TKOs were on the ground. And even in the UFC, despite going 1-2, in both victory and defeat, his best round in all 3 fights was round 2, in my opinion. So he's really just a round 2 fighter. But it's not like he's going to collapse in round 3. You know, he's very durable, never been finished, but he's definitely, he's got some deficiencies as a fighter. On the feet, again, I think he's sharper with the strikes if they're in the pocket. I've got the power and the sharp hooks of Caolan winning, but he's slower, Caolan. I feel like he's a little too slow and plodding. Not that everybody's going to be Jake Hadley, but like I said, even with a grappler, it allows him to bide time and figure out his attacks and his takedowns. I think Caolan would be better served by bringing more pressure instead of this more slow but steady thing. And on the ground, look, he's a beast on the ground, and he does have submissions as well, Caolan earlier in his career. But here, it's about top position against Nathan Fletcher. Fletcher's definitely the better submission artist. And even though they were able to survive each other's submissions as amateurs, they do have to watch out because the skills have only gotten sharper. But I think Caolan can win the fight on the ground if he's smart about his positioning and just tries to keep Nathan Fletcher on his back. If maybe he gets a little too gung-ho and tries advancing against a guy that's really skilled over there, he could end up conceding position. Whereas if he gets top position, like I said, I think he's the heavier guy. I mean, they're going to weigh the same, but I think the strength and the physicality will help Caolan be heavier on top, and I think he can win the points battle like that. But still, gun to my head, I got to go with Nathan Fletcher winning. I think Nathan Fletcher does move well and has better overall grappling, certainly the submission skills, but also the wrestling. And of course, he's willing to use it in the first place. So the pick is Nathan Fletcher, but it's definitely a cautious one. And I will always bet on round 2 TKO for Caolan because that's who I am. Next up, we have Puja Tomar taking on Shauna Bannon. My prediction for this fight is Bannon wins, and I'm going to go with her winning by split decision. Split. The basis for the prediction is I think Shauna Bannon, well, I know she has height and reach, but I think she can use that height and reach and keep Puja Tomar at the end of her strikes and just out-joust her throughout the course of 15 minutes. Shauna Bannon's best jousting weapon is her lead leg. It's not like she's got the heaviest jab out there, but she flicks that lead leg very well, head, body, and hopefully, for her case, the oblique kick. I think she's got to stop Puja Tomar in her tracks. Puja will be in her face trying to advance on her. It's one of the things Puja Tomar has to her advantage here. She's got aggression on her side and octagon control. This girl is very aggressive. Of course, she needs to be because she's very, very short. But she also has power on her side, as is the case with most fighters that are built like bowling balls. Punch for punch, she hits harder than Shauna Bannon. She's produced more knockouts and big moments throughout her career. And yeah, she's definitely the more aggressive fighter. She's got to crowd the kicks of Shauna Bannon and get in her face with her power. But I'm picking Shauna Bannon because I think she can play the matador here. And I also think Shauna Bannon's got more to offer on the ground. I could be completely wrong about that, but that's the hunch. And I think if there are points to be scored, they belong to Shauna Bannon. But Shauna Bannon, she's only got 7 fights. Her one loss was in her first UFC fight, the Bruna Brazil. Not a bad look at all. And of course, that's a decision. And I have to mention one of her decision losses was to Dakota Ditcheva, who's one of the best fighters, maybe the best fighter outside of the UFC right now. And she lost a 5-round decision, 15-minute decision. But still, even though it was a very clinch-heavy fight, it's a good look, her not getting finished by that girl. But yeah, Puja Tomar, she has been finished a few times, and all 4 of her losses, 1 by TKO and 3 by submission. And they're all in the first half of her career. And yeah, I'm not counting her win over Hayani Dos Santos in her last fight, which really could have gone either way, but I thought should have went the other way. But regardless, yeah, she was finished 4 times earlier in her career. They're all to good fighters, and 3 of them are by submission. And the TKO was on the ground as well to stamp Fairtex. So yeah, she's definitely got a deceptive record. She's not as weak on the ground, perhaps, as it looks like, but she's certainly not strong on the ground. Otherwise, a submission victory would have hit the surface by now. But no, Puja Tomar is who she showed herself to be in that first fight. She's much more of an aggressive, power punching striker, and that's fun. But I do think it's limited. And yeah, I think this one will be close because I don't think Shauna Bannon is so deadly. It's not like she's got so much finishing prowess where I think she'll make Puja Tomar pay. But I still think Shauna Bannon has more to offer. I think she's able to outpoint her on the feet, and if if she's looking to exploit her on the ground, which is where she's been beaten in the past, maybe she'll look to take her to the ground. And like I said, I wouldn't expect a finish there for either girl, but I think there are points to be scored there for either girl, really. Puja Tomar's a bowling ball. I think if she gets on top of Shauna, uh, not that it could be trouble, but could be the end of the round. But still, the pick is Shauna Bannon. I think it'll be tight, but I got her winning by decision. Up next, we have Andre Pulayev taking on Christian Leroy Duncan. My prediction here is Christian Leroy Duncan wins, and I'm going to go with him winning by round 2 knockout. I think the best way to beat Christian Leroy Duncan historically is to get on top of him, and I don't think that's going to be so easy for Andre Pulayev. And on the feet, even though Pulayev's got some physical advantages, and he's definitely not bad on the feet, I think Christian Leroy Duncan is just going to be better. I think he'll make up for those physical advantages with sharper striking. I think of course, he moves very well, and what he lacks in conventional punching power, he makes up for with jumping, spinning shit, and wild shit. He's definitely got a very high danger factor, Christian Leroy Duncan. And that's why I think if he's winning this, it's going to be by finish before decision. But Christian Leroy Duncan, yeah, he's durable. That's another great trait of his. He stood up in a loss to Gregory Robocop Rodriguez without getting finished. How many people could say that? Probably a few of them. But still, in every loss he's had as a pro and as an amateur, he's never been finished. Christian Leroy Duncan. And I think here his durability will certainly be there for him. I don't think Pulayev's going to be able to go through him in any way. And I don't think he's going to be able to slow him down enough with grappling. Pulayev is a good grappler. I mean, I don't know if he's a good grappler, but as he's fought better opposition, he's used his grappling and been able to advance and outlast and even finish guys. He's gotten 2 submissions, but they're both in like his last 4 fights. And one of his 2 decisions was in his last fight against Liam Anderson. But still, he is a striker first and foremost, no matter how well-rounded one claims to be. The record doesn't lie. He is a striker first and foremost. And I think here he's up against it striking-wise. I think those physical advantages of his aren't going to help him out too much. And, of course, I've harped on the durability of Christian Leroy Duncan. Well, Pulayev's got 2 losses, and one of them is a TKO. The other's a decision. He lost by decision to this guy, Tuganbayev. I wasn't able to see it. If you know what it looks like, let me know. And then he lost 2 fights later by TKO in round 1 to this guy, Anvar Beck something. And that fight I was able to see. And Anvar Beck was in his face, had him uncomfortable and on the back foot. And he ate some big shots. And eventually, he didn't go down, but he just got overwhelmed and the ref stopped it. Wasn't the greatest look, but still, it's the only time he's been finished. But yeah, I do have to go with Christian Leroy Duncan here. I know he's not getting a bad matchup and somebody that could just take him to the mat. And on the feet, I think he's still, he's incredible, Christian Leroy Duncan. And I think he'll be able to shine here, find himself a lot more comfortable than he was in that whole fight against Gregory Rodriguez. And I think he picks up the pace and gets a finish. So I'll go with Christian Leroy Duncan by round 2 knockout. And haven't bet on him. Certainly not going to bet on his money line. But yeah, I'll wait to see if there's anything to do here. Next up, we have Mick Parkin versus Marcin Tybura. My prediction for this fight is Marcin Tybura wins. And I'm going to go with him winning by decision. I think Marcin looks pretty good for a 39-year-old, which is old even for a heavyweight. And he does have a handful of knockout losses on his record. So there's definitely concerns there. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think his chin is under such a big threat against Mick Parkin, despite his nice knockout win in his last fight against Lucas Dreschke. But in general, Mick is a mauler, wants to get on top of you and maul you, kind of like Tybura. That's how most of his finishes come. And I think, sure, there is danger there. These guys are fucking 300-pound men. Sure, there's danger, but I don't think Marcin Tybura is under such a big threat of the knockout. On the feet, and as far as the technical kickboxing goes, I think Marcin Tybura is very much in that as well. I think he moves well for a guy his size. He's got some nice flexible legs too, some deceptively flexible legs for a guy his size. And of course, the crux of the matter, the crux of my prediction is he's also got some good wrestling and grappling for a guy his size. And I do think he can be that next level opponent to get on top of Mick Parkin. Mick Parkin's been fighting at the bottom end of the UFC heavyweight division. This is a big step up in Marcin Tybura. And I think Marcin Tybura, again, is a match for him on the feet technically without his chin failing him. And on the ground, I think Marcin Tybura, he can be a big problem for Mick Parkin. I think he would be likely to win the wrestling battle. Although Mick Parkin, he's a big guy, and like I said, he likes to get on top of you as well. But Tybura, I think, will be a little quicker. I still think he's pretty healthy, for a 39-year-old as far as his athleticism and whatever goes. Athleticism. Have you seen this guy fight? Yeah, but I still think he's looking good. He did get submitted by Sergey Spivak, but that's the only guy to ever submit him, and I don't think Mick Parkin's got a submission in the guard in him, a submission from the guard in him. And I think the first submission would certainly go to Marcin Tybura here, if I had to guess. But I think Marcin Tybura will struggle a little more for takedowns. It won't be as easy as it was against Jonathan Deniz. Again, I think his chin will generally be safe. And in a prolonged fight, I've got his takedowns and grappling being the difference on points and him winning a decision. But he is Marcin Tybura. If he's heavy on top, if he gets on top, he's very heavy. He can drain the fucking life out of you and put you away. And of course, on the flip side, Mick Parkin, I think he's not such a big knockout threat, but he's undefeated. And he showed in his last fight, he can put guys away. So maybe he'll be gearing himself towards that finish and thinking about nothing else and looking to get on that chin. So maybe there's something there. I haven't seen the props, but as far as the money line, which is the only thing available, my money's on Marcin Tybura, and that is my pick. Next up, we have Loner Kavanaugh versus Felipe Dos Santos. My prediction here is Kavanaugh wins by decision. Having said that, I've already bet on Felipe Dos Santos. That's right. I bet on him like 2 days ago. The odds were a little better, a lot better, frankly, +3 something. Now they're +230. But still, I saw value in Felipe and still do. And it's not just the value in Felipe. It's really in this specific matchup. He's fighting another kid who's 20 fuck years old and has 8 fights as a pro. So that leaves room for some other shit on the other side of things. And I just think Felipe Dos Santos, there's value on him. I do think he's technically a step behind Loner Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh's really sharp on the feet. And on the ground, I think Kavanaugh has strength and physicality, which will plague Felipe Dos Santos in probably every loss moving forward. He's one of those guys like Carlos Condit and the Diaz brothers and Kevin Holland and whoever the fuck else, where he's good everywhere, good off his back, but he can be pinned by strong wrestlers. And I do think that will be responsible for the majority of his losses, and I expect the majority of his losses to be by decision, just like with the rest of those guys. But still, I think Felipe Dos Santos can give him trouble. He's really good off his back, Felipe Dos Santos. Just look to that round 3 triangle choke over Marcus Degley, who is surging since that fight. And, of course, he had to fight his way out of Marcos' own triangle earlier in round 2. And also on the feet, just look to his fight with Manel Kopp. I mean, he didn't have any big moments there, really, any major moments. And I did think he lost all 3 rounds, but it was no shutout. He was very much in that fight, and that was a fight he took on very short notice. And of course, that guy is fighting for the world championship in a few months. So I think that says a lot about his cardio, first of all, and a lot of other traits about him as a fighter, his heart, his will, whatever the fuck. But also his technical skills on the feet and his durability. Because let's face it, Manel Kopp is as dangerous as it gets. But yeah, Felipe's pretty dangerous himself. I do think punch for punch, he's lacking in power. Same with Condit and Diaz and everyone else. But I do think he still brings that creativity, and he can, again, carry a fight for 15 minutes very comfortably. I think he's dangerous down the stretch. And if Kavanaugh gets a little lackadaisical, he can make him pay really anywhere. So I just think in general, there's value on Felipe Dos Santos. I think he's got durability and a lot of traits going for him to keep him alive. And he's got versatility and a lot of skills going for him to give himself a shot. So the value's on Felipe Dos Santos, but the pick has to be Loner Kavanaugh. He's only got 8 fights, but he's got some eight great performances. He's shown he's been able to win by decision, and in 2 of those fights, in all 3 of those fights that he won by decision, he's lost a round. I thought he lost round 2 in his last 2 decision wins in Cage Warriors and in his UFC debut over Jose Ochoa. The guys were able to take it to him and crowd him and land some really good shots. And speaking of which, in his first decision win, he was knocked down and had round 1 stolen. He was badly hurt at the end of round 1, and then he battled back and reclaimed the victory over the next 2 rounds. So he's shown a lot of great traits, and again, being able to lose a round and come back and win, that's a good look for a young fighter in these competitive fights. Of course, he's shown he can get finishes every which way. I mean, he's only got 1 submission, but he's got a nice knockout by a spinning back kick in round 3. And he almost got the guy out of there in round 1 or whatever, too. Maybe he didn't almost get him out of there, but he landed the kick anyway. But yeah, he's definitely a dynamic guy himself. And I think punch for punch, he hits harder than Felipe Dos Santos. And I expect him to be ahead on points. I think he does win this fight by decision. But of course, Felipe Dos Santos, like I said, he's got a lot going for him. And I think there's value on him. Next up, we have Chris Padilla versus Jai Herbert. My prediction for this fight is Jai Herbert wins, and I've got him winning by decision. I think Chris Padilla, he's looked good so far in the UFC. Got a nice doctor stoppage with a cut on Zhu Rong, even though there's no telling who would have won that fight without the doctor stoppage. And he had a great debut against James Yantop, winning by submissions out of nowhere, really. But in general, he's taken a big step up here. His level of opposition is nowhere near the level of Jai Herbert's, which is why Jai Herbert's had mixed results as of late. But he's had mixed results against guys who are doing incredibly well. Faraz Ziam, Ludovic Klein, Rolando Bedoya, maybe not there, but still. Jai Herbert, I think, is that next level for Chris Padilla. And I think if Jai Herbert's chin doesn't fail him here, I expect him to win this fight. I think Jai can give problems for a lot of fighters just with his rangy striking. But of course, he's the bigger man. And without getting split open by an elbow either and getting cut, I think he can rough up Chris Padilla in tight. And I think Chris Padilla is better on the ground than Jai Herbert. But I don't think Jai Herbert's going to make it easy for him to take the fight there. So I've got Jai Herbert winning this fight by decision. But yeah, his chin, you hear me mention it every video, it is a concern. He's been knocked out a few times throughout the years, but they are to great fighters. Ilia Topuria, Reese McKee, Francisco Trinaldo. But yeah, it's happened and stands the reason that it'll be responsible for losses he should have in the future, if he does have them. But I'm not picking him to have him here. I think he'll be able to keep himself safe from Chris Padilla, stop the grappling attacks, and get the better of him on points, at range, and again, in tight. Chris Padilla, he's got a few losses throughout his career, 6 losses. He was TKO'd once against this guy, Jason Gonzalez, who made it to the UFC. And Jason Gonzalez got him out of there in round 2. Really, it was a body shot that did it in, or a few body shots. No doubt the body was responsible, though. But that's the only time he was ever finished like that, and that was his first loss. He then lost twice by submission, one of them being to Gabe Green, former UFC fighter. I don't know. He might still be around. And then the rest of his fight losses are all by decision, and not to bad fighters either. But I still think in general he's taken a big step up here. I know he's in his prime and whatever, but he still hasn't impressed me enough in his 2 victories in the UFC, especially considering the way they happened and the opposition, for me to pick him to beat Jai Herbert. I think Jai Herbert, again, keeps himself safe and gets the better of him at range and in tight, and wins this one on points. Although Jai's very fucking dangerous himself, so maybe he works the body and gets a TKO. But yeah, Jai Herbert is the prediction. Next up, we have Nathaniel Wood versus Morgan Charriere, as I like to say. And Morgan Charriere is my pick to win this fight. I'm going to go with him winning by decision, I guess. But he's a really fucking dangerous guy. I think Morgan Charriere's power will be the difference if it does go to the scorecards, although Nathaniel Wood will have volume on his side. But I still think his style, Morgan Charriere's style, and his power can bring down the volume of Nathaniel Wood and make it more about the power. And physically, I think Morgan Charriere is going to be tough to bulldoze and to score a lot of points on the ground. And I think, of course, if I had to pick anybody to get finished here, it'd be Nathaniel Wood. Charriere's been finished once, and it was by heel hook 10 years ago, but he's been beaten 9 other times, and they're all by decision. And the last 6 of them, I think, are split or majority decisions. And he was fighting the best fighters in Europe. And, of course, in his last fight, he fought Chepe Mariscal, who was a guy just like him that had a good amount of losses and an underrated record coming into the UFC. And I think both guys are going to make a splash. They've already made splashes, really. Certainly Chepe. But Morgan arguably won that fight. It was very close. And his other 2 UFC fights are knockouts. Got a beautiful body shot and then knocked out Gabriel Miranda in his last one. He's definitely the more dangerous guy between him and Nathaniel Wood. And even though Nathaniel Wood's only been finished truly once with strikes, it was against John Dodson, I do think Morgan Charriere hits harder than anybody he's ever fought. So there's that. And also, Andre Fili nearly had him out of there, had him badly hurt, and then maybe cost himself the fight by going on the ground and whatever. But he had Nathaniel Wood hurt, and I do think, again, Morgan hits harder than every one of these guys. Nathaniel Wood, yeah, that was he was TKO'd one other time. It was a doctor stoppage or whatever. But he was submitted twice earlier in his career. I don't think either guy is under such a big submission threat, but I mentioned that Morgan lost once by submission. I may as well mention that Nathaniel Wood was tapped twice. But again, I'd be surprised if that happened here for either guy. And Nathaniel Wood, right out of the gate, coming to the UFC, got 3 nice submission victories and really made a splash, showed he rounded out his game, getting 3 submissions down the stretch, opening up his UFC career. But yeah, I don't know why I'm talking so much about submissions. I do think Morgan Charriere is stronger and will be able to nullify any grappling attempts and get the better of any, physical battles. And on the feet, I think he's going to win that physical battle as well. Again, I think Morgan Charriere hits harder, has the better chance of producing a big moment and certainly a knockout. And I think his style will bring down that volume of Nathaniel Wood, which is a potential advantage, certainly. But I think he brings down that volume. I can't fucking talk. And he wins this fight with his power in one way or another. whether it's a finish or on points. But yeah, Morgan Charriere is the pick. I've already bet on him, and if I need to hedge, I know Nathaniel Wood by decision is a great hedge because that is his sole path to victory here, aside from the cut doctor stoppage and the broken leg and all the horse shit. Don't hold it against me, you fucking jerk offs. Next up, we have Jordan Vucenic taking on Chris Duncan. My prediction for this fight is Jordan Vucenic wins, and I've got him winning by submission in round 2. Let's go with a rear naked choke. I think Jordan is better technically on the ground than Chris Duncan, and Jordan's very sharp technically on the feet as well. And Jordan also has some good traits. He's no stranger to fighting long fights, really comfortable going 15 minutes, really comfortable going 25 minutes if need be. And he's never been finished himself. He's only got 3 losses, but they're spread out throughout his career, and they're all against good fighters, and he's never been put away. I think Chris Duncan's primary path to victory here is decision, and I might look to put a sprinkle or 2 on that, to be honest. But my prediction definitely is Vucenic goes through him on the ground and gets him out of there with a submission. Chris Duncan's been finished in both of his losses. He was submitted against Manuel Torres in his last loss 2 fights ago, and he was knocked out against Slavakos 6 or 7 fights back on the Contender Series. And then in his second Contender Series fight, he was almost knocked out against Charlie Campbell before he turned the fight around with 1 punch and knocked him unconscious. Chris Duncan, he's definitely got danger to him, and he showed in his last fight he can be dangerous on the ground. He got his second submission victory over Blachowicz, who was taking it to him and busted him up. And I thought that was a great way to win your second submission victory, doing it like that in the UFC, and showing there's more to you than just striking. But yeah, I have to pick Jordan here because I think there's more to him than just grappling. I don't think he's at a disadvantage on the feet, even though he doesn't have a lot of knockouts to him. He's really sharp technically, and he did show in his last fight. Yeah, he can be dangerous as well. Again, he knocked Guram down. But I think this fight will be competitive on the feet and not too competitive on the ground if Jordan's able to get on top of him. Most of Jordan's wins come by submission. A lot of them down the stretch, a good amount in round 2. And even though Chris Duncan was only finished in round 1 with his 1 submission loss, I've got Jordan Vucenic figuring Chris Duncan out, getting in his face, getting him on the ground, and then slowing him down to an eventual finish. I will look to play that or cover that prediction with some sort of a bet, or the over-under, whatever, I don't know. But like I said, I will put a sprinkle on Chris Duncan by decision. Because despite all of his finishes, I think that's far and away his most likely path to victory considering the opponent. And he's a nice, chunky underdog to begin with. So the odds could be good. Next up, we have Alexia Thainara taking on Molly McCann. My prediction for this fight is Molly McCann wins, and I'm going to go with her winning by decision. And the basis for the prediction is Alexia Thainara is taking this fight on short notice. I know she's been preparing for the UFC in general, but not for a fight in specifically, I guess. And it stands to reason that Molly McCann is in better shape than she is on Saturday night. Although she's in her mid-30s and Alexia's in her mid-20s, so there's that. But yeah, Molly I do think would be in better shape, and Molly I know hits harder. So those are her advantages there, and also she's probably physically stronger. But still, Alexia Thainara is quick on the feet. She's not as bad as her record would indicate. She's not nearly the threat that Molly is with her danger. In fact, her 1 knockout loss that you see, or knockout win that you see on her record isn't a knockout. It's a submission. Alexia Thainara. Sherdog has it as a knockout. Tapology has it as a submission due to strikes. But it's a submission due to a rear naked choke. So she doesn't have any TKOs, but she's definitely comfortable on the feet. I know she's quicker than Molly McCann. And on the ground is where I think her true advantage lies. She is the more willing grappler in the first place, so probably more likely to secure positions just based on that. And she's definitely the better submission artist as well. And got a really nice submission victory over Raoni dos Santos, shucking off an armbar and then coming right back after with a rear naked choke. That's probably her best submission victory. She doesn't have too many great wins, Alexia Thainara, because, she hasn't fought too many great opponents. But she's got some solid wins, a few solid wins, and her one loss is definitely solid. That's the Bruna Brazil, and it's in her third fight. And it was by guillotine in round 3. And of course, Bruna Brazil is the last girl to beat Molly McCann. So, yeah, definitely a forgivable loss. But yeah, I think Alexia's got a lot going for her, technically and physically and whatever. She's 27 years old, definitely the brighter future. But I still think Molly hits harder, is in better shape, and is in general physically stronger. And I think she can stop Alexia Thainara from slowing her down and start to get off on her with her power and take over this fight. I think Molly can certainly take over the fight on the feet, but even on the ground, Molly McCann is not as bad as her record would indicate. And of course, she got her first submission victory in her last victory. There's definitely more than meets the eye with Molly, but yeah, she might not get a submission, but she can secure position and use all those physical traits to pound the shit out of you. And I think Molly McCann can find success anywhere in this fight if she gets Thainara tired, which is certainly a possibility given the circumstances. But she's also got just that natural equalizer power where, Molly McCann has knocked girls dead, as opposed to Alexia Thainara, whose one knockout win is a lie. So, yeah, so I'm going with Molly McCann. Going with Molly McCann based on a lot of circumstances and a few traits. But Molly McCann is the pick, and it's a cautious pick because this girl, Alexia Thainara, has been on my radar for some time, and she definitely has my respect. Next up, we have Gunnar Nelson versus Kevin Holland. My prediction for this fight is Gunnar Nelson wins, and I'll go with him winning by decision, but I'm not too confident in that prediction. First of all, if I'm right and Gunnar wins, a submission is certainly possible. But I think Kevin is tougher to submit than he's looked as of late. And I also think Gunnar Nelson, despite being an incredible jiu-jitsu artist, he's lacking the physicality of the guys that have beaten Kevin Holland on the ground. Certainly the guys that have finished him, but even the guys that have pinned him and neutralized him. Gunnar Nelson is half as strong as Marvin Vettori, Derek Brunson, and fucking Hamzat Chimaev. But still, Gunnar, it's not all about physical strength on the ground. He's got technical strength. He's really technical, and I think technically he's enough. It's enough for Kevin to beat Kevin Holland. Maybe not to advance and go through him on the ground, but I think at the very least, if he pins him, he's going to hold him there and slowly advance. Kevin Holland is really comfortable off his back, again, despite some recent shitty looks. And on the feet, of course, I think Kevin Holland has an advantage. Gunnar Nelson's got good striking, but leaves himself open a lot. At least he did in his prime. And of course, now he's 36 years old. He hasn't fought in 2 years. And Kevin Holland fights every other weekend. So Kevin Holland's definitely got some things going for him, both naturally, again, fighting much more frequently, but also on the feet. He's got technical advantages. Kevin hits a lot harder than Gunnar. He's got deceptive pop at his punches for the long, skinny guy. And Kevin Holland has a lot of height and reach on Gunnar Nelson as well. Gunnar's got that style, half karate thing going on or whatever, a wide base and low stance, low hands sometimes. And I do think on the feet, he's going to be at a disadvantage against Kevin Holland, both as far as the points go and certainly as far as getting knocked out goes. Kevin Holland has a rock-solid chin. The only time I've ever seen it compromised was with a headbutt from Kyle Dawkins but he's fucking rock solid. And the Stephen Wonderboy Thompson finish, it was a beating, but it wasn't a legit finish. Gunnar Nelson's only been finished once, and it was against Santiago Ponzinibbio. And I think he stuck his finger in his eye socket there, so that might have had something to do with it. But still, his chin did fail him. That was a round one knockout, and it was many years ago. It was 8 years ago. But still, like I said, now Gunnar is only 8 years older, 36 years old, almost 37, and coming off a 2 year layoff, showing up every 7 years, descending with the locust to fucking grace us with his presence. So tough to really know what we're getting with Gunnar Nelson. I think, generally speaking, I know he's got an advantage on the ground, technically, and Kevin, I know, has an advantage on the feet. Something's got to give, and I'm going with Gunnar Nelson by decision victory. I think he may not have the physicality of Marvin Vettori, and he may not have the physicality of Khamzat Chimaev or Brendan Allen, but Gunnar Nelson is stronger than he looks on the ground. And again, that's all due to technique. He's got suffocating technique, and I think once he shucks off a few submission attempts and wild scrambles and attempts from Kevin Holland, he's going to neutralize him and slow him down and win this fight on points. Although, again, he's Gunnar Nelson, so a submission wouldn't totally surprise me. But yes, for Kevin Holland winning, even though Gunnar's only been knocked out once, I would think Kevin Holland wins by knockout as well before decision. But certainly a decision is not out of the realm of possibility for him either. And of course, that would entail a lot of striking at range, where Kevin Holland has the advantage. But yeah, the pick is Gunnar, and I'm going with him winning by decision for some fucking reason. Next up, we have Carlos Ulberg taking on Jan Blachowicz. My prediction for this fight is Jan Blachowicz wins, and I'm going to go with him winning by decision, even though I'd love to see a TKO. But look, there's definitely doubt with Jan. He is now 42 years old. He's coming off of a 2 year layoff. And with the injuries and the mileage and the horse shit, and again, the age, there's definitely doubt in Jan Blachowicz. But when we last saw him, way back when he was 40, he was doing very well with the best fighters in the world. The two guys that fought for the title last weekend, Padilla and Ankalaev, Jan Blachowicz, his last two fights are razor-thin decisions against both of those guys. So he's still at or near the top of the division, and we won't know he's fallen off until we see it happen. And I think Jan Blachowicz still has my faith. I think Jan Blachowicz can give Carlos Ulberg a lot of trouble. Ulberg's definitely faster than him on the feet, moves better, and strikes faster. And he can be the outside striker and give him a lot of trouble. But Jan probably hits harder. He hits really fucking hard. And he's a really smart fighter. Really patient, timely counters. He works everything. He could be working those legs if he sees the opportunity. And also, I think Jan Blachowicz is definitely the better and more willing grappler. And he can be a tricky grappler, Jan Blachowicz. I think he can lull Carlos Ulberg into a striking battle and then turn it into a grappling battle. Again, he's 42. Maybe his knees have fallen off a cliff in the last 2 years, but there's no reason to count on that. And the Jan Blachowicz, who I last saw, I think would give Carlos Ulberg a lot of trouble. Ulberg's only been finished once, and it was against Kennedy Nzechukwu. He was knocked out. He was teeing off on Kennedy, having his way with him for whatever, a good few minutes, a round and a half. And then he started slowing down, started getting clipped. Kennedy was taken over, and Kennedy eventually put him out. It was a learning lesson, I'm sure, a lesson that he learned. But he's still not the most experienced guy, even though he's looked phenomenal since that loss. Jan Blachowicz, he's got too many losses to get into. He's got 10 of them. But as far as the knockout, which is the primary threat here, he's only truly been knocked out once, and it was against Thiago Santos 6 years ago. Thiago got him out of there in round 3 of their main event. Before that, he lost in between rounds 2 and 3 against Sokaju, if you remember Sokaju. But yeah, Jan Blachowicz, even at 42, he's got a reliable chin. Really fucking tough guy to put away and still really dangerous. Power is the last thing to go. And Jan, yeah, he's been submitted to by Glover Teixeira and whatever. And we've seen Carlos Ulberg's got more than meets the eye with his victory over Dawoon Jung. But Jan Blachowicz should have the advantage on the ground. Should get the first submission for sure, and should score the points that are there to be scored. Jan Blachowicz, and that's what I've got happening. I don't think. I don't think it's going to be easy. I don't think it's going to be pretty, and I do think Jan is going to be a half step behind in the beginning of this fight. But I'm taking Jan Blachowicz to win here, taking him to figure Carlos Ulberg out, slow him down, and test him in ways he hasn't been tested. So yeah, Jan Blachowicz is the pick. Jan Blachowicz is the bet, and I really hope he doesn't turn out to be 42 years old, like it says on his record. Next up in the main event of the evening, we have Leon Edwards versus Sean Brady in the latest example of me picking against the hometown fighter. That's right. I'm going with Sean Brady. I'm going with the American. I'm going to take him winning by decision, but he's Sean Brady, so a submission is always possible. Even though Leon is an underrated grappler and he's never been submitted himself, Sean Brady can submit anybody. But yeah, I'll go with him winning by decision. And no matter how he wins, I think he's going to have pressure on his side here, as opposed to Leon Edwards, who will have the crowd on his side. So there's that. But yeah, that is scary in a close fight. But I do think Sean Brady, if he fights the fight, I think he can fight. Then it can't be denied, even by a biased crowd. But look, Brady is better on the ground in general, even though Leon's underrated there. And Leon is better on the feet, even though Brady's underrated there. Leon is the sharper striker. The thing is, Leon is too passive. And I think that passivity is going to cost him here. I think if he was, really able to put the foot on the gas, especially if and when he smells blood, kind of like Bilal Muhammad did, then I think he could make his striking advantage more of a thing. But Leon Edwards likes to use his striking advantage to neutralize and nullify instead of seek and destroy. And I think he'll want to keep Sean Brady at the end of his punches and kicks and just be the sharper striker and have that Colby Covington fight all over again. But Sean Brady's a young athlete in his prime. I don't think he's going to sit comfortably at the end of anyone's strikes. I think he's going to try to duplicate that fifth round of Colby Covington and get in Leon's face. And I think Sean Brady has looked great in every fight but his loss. He's looked great. He's got excellent cardio. He showed he had 5-round cardio too against Gilbert Burns. And even before going 5 rounds, I mean, he's produced a lot of finishes down the stretch. Sean Brady. There's nothing better than those last round submissions. And he's gotten them over excellent fighters where, yeah, I trust Sean Brady. I know he slipped against Michael Chiesa. Chiesa was the last man standing in that fight. And I know he's had some other dicey moments here and there. But the only time he's ever been beaten was against Bilal Muhammad. And that guy's the best guy in the world who just took Leon Edwards, took the title from Leon Edwards. And Sean Brady, yeah, he's got a lot of great traits. That's what produces those round 3 finishes. And I'll tell you, even before coming to the UFC, not that he beat world beaters, but maybe one guy was like a bum before he got to the UFC. But the other guys, like just about everybody he fought was decent, if not good or even very good. And he's been able to beat all of them but Bilal. And Bilal was able to take away the wrestling. And I don't think Leon Edwards is going to be able to take away the wrestling. I know Leon was able to largely take away the wrestling of Kamaru Usman not long ago either, when Kamaru was the man of the hour. And hell, he was able to knock him out as well. But I still think Leon is too passive where he's going to let Sean Brady lead the dance with his forward pressure. Sean's striking is coming along. He definitely has some good pop in his punches too. And Leon's been rocked a few times. Brian Barberina, Nate Diaz, whoever else. It's happened. But yeah, I think Sean Brady, I don't expect him to have any big moments on the feet, but I think on the feet, he can put together, he can use his striking to put together some takedown attempts and nice entries and just bring that pressure, that conventional Sean Brady pressure, and start to break Leon Edwards. I mean, Leon looks like he's breaking between every round of every fight, but I do envision his coaches telling him not to let him bully you, son. Don't let him bully you. I think it's going to be that type of fight all over again. And here, I'm not predicting any sort of Hail Mary comeback or anything. I think Sean is going to be the one outlasting Leon, and that is the pick. Sean Brady gets in his face, and I've got him winning a decision. Although, again, I'd love to see him win by submission. But yeah, I'm going with Sean Brady because I'm a jerk off who goes against the hometown fighters. Like, share, subscribe, all that horse shit, and check out my other videos.